Hello and a warm welcome to Vision IS. Today I'm going to discuss news today for 10th January 2026. In the main news, we'll first discuss DRDO tests scramjet engine for hypersonic missiles. So here we'll understand what exactly is a scramjet engine, what are hypersonic missiles, and we'll also understand why this is a very significant development. Second news, guidelines for entities providing virtual digital asset related services. So here we'll understand what are the key features of these guidelines and why these guidelines are important. Third, Param Shakti supercomputing facility launch. So here we'll understand what are the major significance and the achievements of this particular supercomputer and the speed and other aspects. Fourth, Indian diaspora as a living bridge. Here we'll understand the role and significance of Indian diaspora in foreign policy making and the various roles that they play. And lastly, we'll discuss India achieves all-time high fertilizer production in 2025. Here we'll understand what are the reasons why India was able to achieve this feat and what could be the significance of this particular move. Along with that, we are also having quick updates as well. So let us start with the very first news, that is DRDO's tests scramjet engine for hypersonic missile. And this topic, of course, is from GS paper 3, internal security. Now, to understand this context, it is very important for us to understand that the modern warfare are essentially fought through various missiles, and it is not merely about the land operated battlefields, right? So in this context, we require both defense capabilities and offense capabilities. And this was also witnessed during Operation Sindoor, where our defense capabilities was essentially supported by the missile capabilities, right? So here the important development that we need to understand is that this was done by the DRDO's Hyderabad-based Defense Research and Developmental Laboratory, and it was essentially a ground-tested full-scale. So it was not a limited but a full-scale actively cooled scramjet engine. Now, what this significance here is that in hypersonic or scramjet engine, essentially the engine gets a lot of heat because of the fact that it is operating at such a high speed, sometimes even 5 times higher than the speed of sound. Because of that reason, there's a buildup of heat in the engine. As a result of that, you require active cooling system, right? So for that, there is active cooling system and it has a scramjet engine. So scramjet engine essentially is an enhanced version of ramjet engine, and we'll discuss what exactly are some of the key features of ramjet engine. Now, the duration is very significant because it exceeded 12 minutes. So essentially, it means that for 12 minutes, the missile could be operated, right? So since this is essentially a guided missile, which means that we can control the maneuverability, which means that we can understand and use it for precision attacks, right? Third, the importance here is that it serves as a foundation for the indigenous hypersonic cruise missile development program, right? So hypersonic basically means speed of this missile is greater than 5 Mach. Mach is essentially speed of sound. Now you may be asking what exactly is the difference between supersonic and hypersonic. So supersonic essentially means speed above 1 Mach, right? So basically, hypersonic is an extended version of supersonic cruise missile. Cruise missile is one which is guided in nature, right? Which can be controlled. This is as opposed to ballistic missile. So ballistic missile is the one that is initially given a thrust from the jet or any other engine, and then it uses gravity. So basically, we can say that the cruise missiles are for offensive purpose and ballistic missile is for defense purpose. And for in India, during Operation Sindoor, we had utilized both offensive capabilities and defensive capabilities, right? So with respect to offensive, we have the flagship missile, that is our BrahMos, and defensive, we have Akash. Okay. So understand this, right? This is about, and it is going to serve as a foundation for the hypersonic cruise missile development. Now let us understand some of the key features of this. So first, from the perspective of prelims, we should understand what are the key concepts involved. So scramjet, as I mentioned earlier, is essentially a supersonic combustion ramjet. Supersonic means speed above 1 Mach, at least this should be there. So it can be above 5 Mach as well, but supersonic is an inclusive term, right? So it means that speed is greater than the speed of sound. Then it is a combustion ramjet. Ramjet essentially is, it's an improvement over the ramjet engine, and it is a form of air breathing jet engine. Air breathing basically means that you are using air as your combustion or your fuel, right? Instead of using your other fuel which is required, you are using air as your fuel. And it uses the vehicle's forward motion to compress the incoming air for combustion, not the backward but the forward. The thrust that is given is that provides or sucks in the oxygen or the air that is required for its propulsion, right? What are its key features? So first, it requires some assisted takeoff, as it cannot produce thrust at zero airspeed, so it requires a forward motion. Second, efficiency. It is lighter and more fuel efficient than conventional rockets, and it allows longer ranges as well. Then importantly, this makes India part of an elite club, including Russia, US, China, which has successfully tested the scramjet engines. Okay. Now, with respect to all these development, hypersonic weapons or missiles, what exactly they are? They are capable of speeds exceeding Mach 5. So you can, which is about more than 6,100 km per hour. So the speed of sound from this can be determined like it is around 1200 or slightly more than 1200 km per hour. Okay, offering rapid global reach and high evasion. So basically, it evades itself from the radar of the enemy territory and against the air defense systems. Fly at lower altitude. So this is basically the ballistic missiles fly above the atmosphere, but this is the cruise missiles are essentially at the lower altitudes than the ballistic missiles, and therefore they are difficult to track, especially by the satellites. Now there are two types of hypersonic weapons. One, you have hypersonic glide vehicles, which are launched from a rocket similar to regular ballistic missiles before gliding to a target. So essentially, once you provide their launch from a rocket, it essentially follows the gravity. But then you have hypersonic cruise missiles. So hypersonic essentially means that any missile which has speed higher than 5 Mach, but it can be both in terms of glide vehicles. Glide vehicles essentially is like ballistic missile, and you have cruise component, that is cruise missile, which are self-propelled and precision guided. So this is for precision attacks. Okay, and it maintains sustained and controlled flight to strike targets accurately. So when government launched Operation Sindoor to target the terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan, this precision is required, right? So this is, therefore it is very essential that we are developing and we are going indigenizing all these technology ourselves. Now from the perspective of exam, a question came which tested your understanding of both types of missile system in India and also the kind of developments. So take a look at this question. There are two statements. Ballistic missiles are jet propelled at subsonic speeds throughout their flights, while cruise missiles are rocket powered only in the initial phase of flight. So as we have already discussed, ballistic missiles are jet propelled at throughout, they are not throughout, only in the initial stages, right? And then it follows gravity. And cruise missiles are essentially jet propelled at, it can be subsonic or it can be at hypersonic speed also. So it is not done in only the initial but throughout their journey. So basically these statements are flipped. So this statement is not correct, right? Second statement, Agni 5 is a medium range supersonic cruise missile. So we have discussed that Agni missiles are what? They are essentially defense based missiles. So they are ballistic in nature. They are not cruise nature. Cruise are basically your offensive missiles. BrahMos is a solid fueled intercontinental ballistic missile, which is again not correct. It is a cruise missile because it is for offensive purpose, targeted in nature, right? So that is why D is correct, neither 1 nor 2. So I hope this concept is clear to all of you. Next topic is recently the Financial Intelligence Unit of India has provided certain guidelines related to the entities that provide some virtual digital asset related services. This, which basically means something related to cryptocurrency, okay, or NFT, right? Non-fungible tokens, etc. So understanding the context here is important, that initially when cryptocurrency was launched or Bitcoin was launched and it was to be integrated within India, the focus of the government of India was largely on taxing it, okay, but it did not talk about the regulation in day-to-day operations of this particular services. So the recent regulation by the government or by FIU, that is the Financial Intelligence Unit, which works within the department or the Ministry of Finance, essentially tries to check that anomaly, and because of that it provides a detailed guidelines which basically talks about how they should be regulated in day-to-day activities. And of course the importance is there that it requires some sort of anonymity. You require some sort of check, right, in terms of how these services are provided. It would also help in ensuring that these currencies are not used for money laundering or financing terrorist activities, etc. So this is the logic behind these regulation. So the FIU has issued updated guidelines to regulate the service provider dealing with VDAs, and it effectively brought this within the AML, that is the anti-money laundering, CFT, that is countering the financing of terrorism, and CPF, that is counter proliferation financing regulatory framework. And because of this guideline, this will require them to comply with due diligence, and it would require them to provide certain reporting obligations similar to other reporting entities, which basically means that it tends to bring parity between the virtual currencies or the services provided by the VDAs along with the financial services provided by the other banking infrastructure. So in 2023, VDA SPs, service providers, were brought under the ambit of Prevention of Money Laundering Act, right? So now with this, additional regulation has been done. So what exactly are the key highlights? So there are 3 major highlights that you should understand. First is that there is going to be appointment of a principal officer. So this principal officer work essentially is to act as a single modal or nodal person or an officer to mediate or to track all these regulatory guidelines within the service provider, right? So every VDA, the virtual digital agencies reporting entity, must appoint a principal officer as a network or as a nodal officer. Second, cyber security and data protection. Now they require a cyber security audit certificate issued by the certain compliant impaneled auditor, right? So there has to be some better cyber security and data protection measures in line with the Indian laws. Then there is another very important development with respect to ending the anonymity in the crypto transfers. So just like you have KYC norms when you send or receive money, or you open a bank account, there is also anonymity part of the crypto transfer is now sought to be ended, because the reporting entities must collect data on the transfer involving unhosted wallet, that is the self-custody wallets. So these are the key highlights. Now let's understand some of the basic terms. For example, for this is important from your prelims perspective. So what exactly is a virtual digital asset? Its definition is provided under Income Tax Act, and how it defines it: any digitally generated information, code, number or token, but it excludes Indian or foreign currency created using cryptographic or similar means, which, so there are three things which you need to understand. One is that it represents digital value. So any number that can be exchanged for something, right? That is your digital value. Second, it is electronically transferable, it is storable, or it is tradable. And non-fungible tokens or any similar digital tokens. Now, income for the transfer of the VDAs have been taxed at the highest bracket of 30%. Along with that, you also have surcharges and cess that is applicable on the transfer of these assets. So initially the focus was on this only, but now all these other aspects are created to ensure that it is complying with the Indian data privacy laws, and also ensuring that it is harmonizing with all the important issue with respect to cyber security, ending anonymity, etc. Now, with respect to PYQ, one PYQ or question came from this topic that was very generic in nature, and that was asked from Indian society perspective. And that question was, what is cryptocurrency? How does it affect global society, and has it been affecting Indian society also? So the question, again, we need to understand that there hasn't been a question with respect to regulatory measures. So the question can be that how is the government of India regulating crypto based agencies in the country? What are the regulations? So this is the response that you can mention as part of the answer. Next news, Param Shakti supercomputing facility launched, and this is part of GS paper 3 science and technology. Now importantly, this is released by IIT Madras by Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So the importance of, like it is said that data is the new oil, but to process this data you require a lot of processing capabilities, right? And you also require a lot of simulation powers, and for that a general computer will not be able to be sufficient in this regard. Therefore it is important that we work for supercomputer development. But the problem here is that most of the technologies or the infrastructure that India had earlier was primarily borrowed or imported from the Western countries. So there was very lack of indigenization in terms of the development of these supercomputers in India. As a response of that, a very significant mission was launched in 2015 by the name of National Supercomputing Mission, or NSM. So within this, several development has taken place, and it is essential for us to understand what exactly is the benefit of this particular move. So if you look at about Param Shakti, it is indigenously developed and manufactured. It is a 3.1 petaflop supercomputing system. So basically this means that it is capable of doing 3.1 quadrillion computing per second. This basically means 10 raised to power 15 quadrillion. So your million is 10 raised to power 6, billion is 10 raised to power 9, trillion is 10 raised to power 12. So trillion is this number. And if you add 1000 trillion, then basically you get a petaflop, right? So this is the capability of this particular supercomputer. Now, among the most powerful computational system available in the Indian academic institutions. It is built using the CDAC or Center for Development of Advanced Computing's Rudra series of servers. So this is important. What if this could be asked in your prelims exam, that what is the name of the server that is used for Param Shakti, that is Rudra series of server, and it is running on an open source software stack including Alma Linux. What is the significance of this particular supercomputer? To support complex research in aerospace engineering, for example, development of aircraft, understanding how it will be operating under different circumstances, simulating in different situations, and material sciences, which material to be used, how would it enhance the environmental aspects and ensure better cooling, etc. Then climate modeling, understanding where the rainfall would occur, all these things, drug discovery, advanced manufacturing, etc. So these are the advanced computing aspects that can be done very easily by using supercomputer. Now, if you look at this national supercomputing mission, again, this is very important that we should have some idea about about the factual aspect. So it was launched, as I already mentioned, in 2015. And it has two major objectives. One is to connect national academic and R&D institutions with a grid of over 70 high-performance computing facilities. So essentially, so that the R&D institutions, academic, the national academic, and the R&D institutions should have a grid or connection or this link of over 70 high-performance computing facilities. And second, for example, recently this IIT Madras Param Shakti. Similarly, you have Param Shivai and other important supercomputers. These supercomputers are networked on the national supercomputing grid over the National Knowledge Network. Now tell me what exactly is the purpose of National Knowledge Network. But more importantly, the role here is indigenization. Okay, Atmanirbharta. Right, because as the world stands today, we know that we cannot rely on any single country for providing these essential software and hardware facilities. So we need to work on these aspects and ensure that we are capable enough to carry on these things without any foreign support. Then NSM is steered means managed directly by the Department of Science and Technology and Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So basically, it shows a collaborative approach, and it is implemented by CDAC, which is based in Pune, and also Indian Institute of Science, which is based in Bangalore. So if you look at some of the basics of Indian supercomputers, some basic facts. So what is India's first supercomputer? That is Param 8000, and the largest supercomputer is Param Pravega, and the first indigenously built supercomputer is Param Shivai. And what is the common compute platform for AI research and knowledge assimilation? That is Airavat. Okay, so these are some of the factual aspects for your prelims exam. Next topic is Indian diaspora as a living bridge connecting India with the world. So this statement was made by our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, recently, when he talked or when he called the Indian diaspora as the cultural ambassador or Rashtraduts. Now the context here is that 9th January is celebrated as Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Okay, why? Because this marks the return of Mahatma Gandhi in 1915. So in 1915, Mahatma Gandhi came back to India from South Africa, and to commemorate this particular journey, we have been using Pravasi Bharatiya Divas to recognize and celebrate the importance of the diaspora in India. Now, who are Indian diaspora? So diaspora essentially is a term for addressing people who have migrated from the country of origin either permanently or temporarily. Okay, so not just the NRIs. NRIs are the non-resident Indians who are whose passport is Indian, right? But they are living or a normal resident of some other countries. So they are also part of diaspora. Then there are people who have adopted the citizenship of some other country. They are also part of diaspora. So we have three types of diaspora: OCI, NRI, and PIO. So NRI are those who are residing in abroad, but they continue to be Indian citizen. But the OCI card holder and PIO are not. So they are registered as OCI card holders under Section 7A of Citizenship Act of 1955, and PIO are those who are a person of Indian origin, which means that their forefathers, their ancestors were Indians, and they are continuing to hold a foreign passport, right? So recently, not recently, 10 years back or 11 years back, PIO and OCI card holders were merged, right? So essentially, there was some sort of overlap in terms of when they can come back to India, the visa facilities, and the kind of the rights that they used to hold in terms of acquisition of property, all these aspects. So just to make streamline the process, now there is only one category, that is OCI. Okay. And if you look at the number of people who are staying or who are Indian diaspora, it is around 34.35 million, including almost half of them are NRIs. So if you look at this number, 17 million NRIs are there, which means that they continue to hold Indian passport, and there are 17 more million who have adopted the citizenship of some other country. Now, why, if they have adopted the citizenship of another country, why they are of concern to us? And this is because of these important reasons. First thing is that they have a very huge, or they are called as cultural ambassador for a reason, right? Because the way they interact with others in foreign countries, or the value system that they bring to other countries, for example, the value of tolerance, the cultural spirit, or the cultural practices of yoga, and they celebrate festivals like Diwali, Holi, etc. They basically, it shows the kind of country or the kind of thing that would be witnessed in the region of India, right? So basically, it strengthens what is called as people-to-people ties, or essentially enhances India's soft power. So soft power is a power that provides for attraction, or it is attraction-based power, as opposed to hard power. Hard power is one that is coercive in nature. So because of this, for example, US, through its Hollywood and through its software industry or through other aspects, has also enjoyed a huge soft power, right? So India has its soft power through things like yoga, Diwali, etc. because this, and cuisine as well. And when Indian people go abroad and practice these cultural activities, India's soft power tend to get improved. Then they also contribute significantly in terms of economy, where India is the largest recipient of remittances. So this is very essential to plug the current account deficit that India has. In fact, in 2025, Indians contributed close to $135 billion, which is the highest. Not only this, but they also contribute in providing jobs to the locals through entrepreneurship. They also work in several important companies, not just in terms of white collar, blue collar job, but also in white collar or highly specialized work as well. And especially India-US IT services industry is basically run, or there is significant presence of Indians engineers there. Then it also provides for some sort of diplomatic leverage. How? Because it provides for mutual relationship and positively shapes India's global image. For example, India-West Asia relations. Then political advocacy. Diaspora can lobby their local governments and international organizations on issues important to India. For example, the Indo-US civil nuclear deal agreement that happened way back in 2000s. that was a major role of that was played by the Indian diaspora, right? So Indian diaspora has far-reaching contribution in the foreign policy of the country. But at the same time, also understand that there are certain diaspora which are also adversarial to India's image and foreign policy. For example, the separatist, Khalistani separatist, right? Or those which go on and they indulge in criminal activities. So it's not that the diaspora always have a positive impact on India's image or India's foreign or policy making, but it also can lead to some sort of deterioration or backlash in the relation. So India-Canada relations earlier last year were deteriorated because of the accusation that India was involved in the assassination of one of the separatist, right? So again, this we have to understand from both perspective. Now, what are the initiatives taken for Indian diaspora? So one is 4 C's of diaspora engagement, which require care for our communities, connect with global networks, celebrate shared heritage, contributions that drive positive knowledge. So there are 4 C's. Then Know India program, basically to help the young diaspora, which are from age group of 18 to 35, to know more about India's culture, heritage, etc. Then Indian Community Welfare Fund, ICWF, for assisting the OCIs in times of distress and emergency. You may have heard about several operations undertaken to evacuate the Indian citizens and the overseas citizens of India during the time of crisis. So 2-3 questions have come from this topic. The larger theme is what are their significance, but now UPSC is asking more and more specific question. So you need to know about both sectoral contribution, which means that contribution in political aspect, in economic aspect, and also in regional domain. For example, what is the contribution with respect to, say, in Southeast Asia? What is the contribution in the West, right? So West means US, Europe, etc. And here the question was with respect to Southeast Asia, right? So you can also mention some of the negative aspects as well. So that would give you some additional points. Next question is about another very important development, that is India has achieved an all-time high fertilizer production in 2025, and this number is around 73%. So all of you know that India does really well when it comes to production of food, but we lack the inputs that is very much required for production and productivity of food supplies, and that one of the key ingredients is fertilizer. And most of our fertilizer, whether it is urea, whether it is DAP, they are imported from different countries, and because of that there is a large number or large section of the people which is vulnerable because there is price fluctuation, because of several wars, and because of war, especially the Russia-Ukraine war, it led to the supply chain disruptions. It also led to inflation. So because of that reason, it is very essential that India looks at fertilizer production not just as an economic issue, but as a national security issue. And because of that, India has taken several measures to ensure that its indigenous production of fertilizer starts to increase. And this particular news affirms that we are able to get to that result, and definitely in the next coming years, the percentages of production will continue to increase. So if you look at the status of fertilizer production, it has record output in terms of the number. It is around 525 lakh metric tons in 2025, which has increased steadily. Last year it was around 509, and before that it was 507. So basically what it indicates that it is not something that came out of sudden, but it is an example of calibrated and a strategic policy making. Then growth trajectory, production has shown a consistent upward trajectory. So if a question comes that what is the status or what is the trend of the fertilization indigenization in the country, so we can convincingly say that it is on an upward trajectory. Then we have discussed that it has reduced the import dependence, as 73% of the total fertilizer requirement is now met through the domestic production in 2025. So as good as news it is, we should also understand how we have been able to achieve this particular feat? To understand this, we need to understand couple of things. First is that we revived the closed unit. So there were several closed units which did not work because of several reasons. Gorakhpur, Sindri, Barauni, etc. It significantly were ramped up the urea capacity. Second was we used strategic sourcing. So we used long-term agreements to secure raw materials like rock phosphate to ensure that the manufacturing can be done in an uninterrupted manner. Then we also try to diversify the supply sources, not only the sourcing of the raw materials, but also the diversification of the supply sources to mitigate the risk. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war with single source dependency. Then indigenous technology was also promoted through the use of liquid nano urea and nano DAP to enhance nutrient efficiency. Now, what are the important significance of this move? As we have already discussed, it is going to be fiscally prudent because it will lower the import. If import is lowered, it will definitely reduce the CAD or the current account deficit. Secondly, it will ensure that there is price stability. It will ensure that the price does not fluctuate because of the changes in the volatility because of geopolitical reason. And third, it will also ensure food and nutritional security. Right, so this is all about the main news. Now we'll come to the quick updates. First news here is National Environmental Standard Laboratory. So what has happened is there is an agency called CSIR, National Physical Laboratory. It has done or established two calibration. Calibration basically means measurement of NESL, that is Environment Facility. Okay. And standard laboratory and national primary standard for solar cell calibration. Okay, so what is NESL? Essentially, NESL is the apex, means the top national facility for testing, calibration and certification for air pollution monitoring instrument. Now the context here is that majority of the air pollution monitoring instruments that India is using is largely taken from the Western countries, and it is essentially is measuring or working in terms of their environment, right? So it is essential that we also design instruments that is calibrated to measure the important aspects of India's weather conditions. So this is an attempt of indigenization of the calibration, and it is considered as the world's second NESL only. At present, only UK has such a laboratory. So this is again one of the most important developments. Then what is the benefit? So it develops India specific standards in terms of all the important components of weather. It ensures credible data because we'll have credible data for the National Clean Air Program, and we can then provide the kind of interventions, especially in the NCR region, and industrial emissions audits can also be done more effectively. Second news, that is NIDMS, that is recently this database of national IED, that is data management system of National Security Guard, has been inaugurated, and essentially this is a secure national digital platform through which accurate and organized analysis of IED, that is improvised explosive devices, and bomb explosion related incidents can be conducted. So the point is that we have several datas, right? But is it integrated or not, or can we share, or is it something that allows for analysis all these aspects or not? So what exactly is the significance of this move is that it enables a pattern analysis. So wherever a bomb has exploded or an IED has done or has been done, then it would be analyzing what is the scenario or what is the locality of this region, all these aspects, right? So this will help in pattern analysis and predicting and preventing such attacks in the future. It will help in inter-agency data sharing and faster investigation, etc. Now the access to platform will be available to NIA, anti-terrorism squads across the country, also to the state police forces and all the CAPFs. right? So this is all about NIDMS. Third news is about graphene, where the researchers have developed a low-cost, flexible sensor using pencil-drawn electrodes and graphene oxide. So here the importance, again, this is a work in progress. So what we should be aware of is the whole idea of graphene. What exactly is graphene and why it is important? So graphene is also known as a wonder material or miracle material because of the key properties that it has. So it possesses high elasticity, it conducts electricity better than copper, and it is its mechanical tensile strength is estimated to be roughly 200 times stronger than steel by weight. So it has so much properties, and it is also very light, right? And the structure, the chemical structure that it has is a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in two-dimensional hexagonal lattice. The applications of graphene includes boosts processing speeds in electronics, enhances battery density, strengthens filter waters for desalination, etc. Next, NCORD or Narco Coordination Center. So Union Minister, Home Minister has recently chaired the 9th apex level NCORD meeting in New Delhi to review national anti-drugs effort. So what exactly is NCORD? It was established in 2016 and restructured in 2019, and it works under Ministry of Home Affairs. The function is coordinating central and state drug law enforcement. So just like US has DEA, India has NCORD in controlling drug trafficking and abuse in India. Structure 4-tiered framework, apex, executive, state and district committees. It helps enforce this particular law, that is NDPS. Initiatives that are NCB provides information related to drug enforcement, Manas 24/7. So this is the helpline, and Nidan offender database, etc. Then some important development with respect to tsunami. So a NASA satellite observation has challenged the conventional understanding of the tsunami behavior. So what happened was this satellite was observing the sea pattern, and accidentally it also tsunami came, and it observed how the tsunami happens from a very micro perspective. And what it observed was that tsunamis exhibit a complex pattern of wave dispersion and interaction, while the conventional understanding is that tsunami is a single stable and non-dispersive wave, right? So the observations showed that it is not a single but multiple waves, not stable but very complex, and it is also dispersive wave, right? So these are the details about tsunami. They are waves caused by earthquakes or volcanic disruptions, right? Then Weimar Triangle. Now why this is in news? Because the Ministry of External Affairs participated in India's first ever engagement in the Weimar Triangle. So we should understand what is Weimar Triangle. So Weimar Triangle is a regional alliance of 3 countries, France, Germany and Poland. It was set up in 1991, and essentially it was a forum for supporting German-Polish reconciliation. All of you would be aware that World War II essentially started with Germany attacking Poland, right? Then the aim was to promote European integration, to ensure or to promote political dialogue, and to also enhance security cooperation. Then another interesting news was seen from Zehanpura site, and this important news was also shared by our Honorable Prime Minister in his Man Ki Baat episode. And what was this? That there was a discovery of stupas at this Zehanpura. And this was done, or it was seen in the Kashmir area, the northern Kashmir region near Baramulla. And it showcases the Buddhist heritage that Kashmir has and its historical role as a center of learning and Buddhist culture. So Zehanpura site is near Baramulla in the North Kashmir region. The stupa structures that were found belonged to the Kushan period, and this Kushan period was around 1st to 3rd century CE. So Kushan was a very patron, or he promoted Buddhism like anything. Located along the ancient Silk route to Kandahar, which essentially suggests that Buddhism was also transfer or also was in a way the learnings were transferred to Afghanistan as well. Then other findings were evidence of wooden superstructures and urban settlement complex, Kushan era pottery. So again, it showed an ecosystem. So Buddhism was not just a religion, but it was a way of life, right? So what kind of people, what pottery did they use, what kind of settlement did they have, right? So all of this was also witnessed through the evacuation or excavation of all these stupas. Then another interesting news is with respect to Shakshgam Valley. So recently, India's external affairs spokesperson was seen addressing the media people, and one of the media person asked a question regarding China's building of roadways in the Shakshgam Valley. So here, India has formally objected to all the infrastructure projects that are being done at the Shakshgam Valley. So this is the Shakshgam Valley, and if you can see this here, so this is the map of the undivided Jammu and Kashmir, and this is the LOC, and LOC essentially is the line of control, which is the border of India and Pakistan in a way, even though India claims that this is POK and India has a rightful ownership of this particular land. But the POK is divided into two parts. You have the northern POK and you have the southern POK. The northern POK is also known as Gilgit-Baltistan, and the southern one they call it as Azad Kashmir. Okay, and then in the 1962 war, China took this territory, which is called as Aksai Chin. Okay, so in 1962, China used this territory, and this territory, which was between Aksai Chin and the upper area of the POK, this part is your Siachen Glacier, and towards its north is your Shakshgam Valley. Now it is said, or in fact it is not said, it is documented that in 1963, China gifted this territory, sorry, Pakistan gifted this territory to China, right? So this territory, which Pakistan does not have any claim on, it gifted to China, maybe to appease it, and this is perhaps one of the reasons why they have such a strong relationship. So there was it was a treaty in 1963, boundary agreement, and as we have seen that Shakshgam Valley is very much strategically located territory in Ladakh, and it is north of Karakoram watershed and integral part of India, right? So this is why India maintains presence in the Siachen Glacier, because if India retreats from this place, then Pakistan and China will have direct access to each other, right? That is why India launched this operation Meghdoot in 1980s, right? To claim land or claim rights on this particular territory, right? Yeah, so this is also known as Trans-Karakoram Tract, lying around both sides of the Shakshgam River. Geography, it is bounded by the Kunlun Mountains and the Karakoram Range. It lies adjacent to the Siachen Glacier. So I hope this part is clear to you. Next, the last news for the day is free space optical communication. And why this is important is that there is new development in this regard, where the scientists have achieved the world's first successful 2 Tbit per second free space FSO communication using what? Small optical terminals that were mounted on satellites and high altitude platform station. So basically the speed was observed. So the point here is that we should understand what is free space optical communication or FSO communication. So it is essentially as opposed to the optical fiber or cables network. So you may have or you already would be aware that during the recent Israel-Hamas war, the Houthis, they started cutting, or they started impacting the optical fibers that were flowing from the Red Sea areas, right? So this basically signifies that the optical fibers, which basically goes from one country to the other, right, they can be held hostage during times of conflict. And now we know that internet is such a significant part of our day-to-day lives that if it is cut or if the supply disruption is there, then it is going to impact the national sovereignty, security of the country as well. So it is very essential that we also take into consideration different ways of providing the digital connection to people. And for this, FSO is a wireless data transmission technology that uses what? Modulated laser or light beams, basically LEDs, to transmit data through free space. And this is free space without optical fibers or cables. So essentially it is without using any cables. Then advantage is that it provides high bandwidth, high data rates, enhanced security, and unlicensed spectrums. And definitely after initial high cost, it will also provide services at a very fraction of cost. At the same time, it requires clean line of sight between the transmitter and key receiver, and it is also prone to atmospheric conditions such as fog, rains, dust, and turbulence, right? So these are the limitation of the FSO. And application, it has inter-satellite link, satellite to ground communication, disaster emergency communication, etc. So this is all about the news today for the day. I hope this was helpful to all of you. Please solve the questions, and all the best.